Hello out there in the YouTubeverse. It is Max and I'm back at you with another video. This one is kind of a special one. It's a kind of an intersection. I think it counts as a pop-up video because it's about Pauper, which we love around these parts. And if you're not familiar, please do check out some of the other videos in the pop-up video series. And what I wanted to talk about today is brewing decks in Arena Pauper. We have been all over Arena Pauper pretty much since it came out. Again, check the backlog. There's a ton of stuff. We put out a Pauper primer every set, and what I wanted to do was make a video to teach you out there how to brew an Arena Pauper deck. When you're deck building is to have an idea of what the angle of attack for the deck is. The way this came about is actually because of this life gain deck, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So Sam wanted to come up with a new deck. For this deck, she said, I really want to build a deck that can do life gain. I want to gain a lot of life in the deck. And I said, okay, so how do we win? You gain a bunch of life. What then? What do you do with it all, right? So we've gained a bunch of life. Are we just going to try to build up a big board of little tiny creatures and smack them? Or what are we going to do to gain life? And I kind of shipped her the notion of there's cards that are black that when you gain life, opponents lose life. So it's a really effective strategy if you're already gaining life to try to slot these cards in order to make your opponents lose life. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about a core concept. Her core concept was she wanted to gain life. And then if you have a core concept, I think a very important part of that core concept should be, how does it win? And that was what I wanted to add to her deck. So when we first started, we thought that Rat Colony was going to be the big breakout deck. It is, and it's absolutely still a deck you will see a bunch of. Out of that kind of was born a metagame. So that was kind of the deck that started it all, right? And it became, what beats that deck, right? That's the deck. So how do we next level it? And slowly the format has evolved to what I feel like are the three strongest decks of the format. And I don't want to say decks specifically. A better term is archetypes. There is the red archetype, and we'll take a look at that. And again, if you've seen our other videos, you'll kind of know it's coming. But this is the newest version as it sits. In my opinion, I think you can definitely, season to taste, right? So this deck is built around Kiln Fiend, Kessig Flame Breather, which is one of the new additions, Thermo Alchemist, and it's trying to just deal a buttload of damage, very similar to its Paper Pauper or regular Great Pauper counterpart. It's doing that. And it's not so much based on burn decks like the regular Pauper deck is. This is based on dealing damage via triggers more than dealing direct damage to the opponent. Now, we do have direct damage, right? We have Hungry Flames, we have Shock, we have Pillar of Flame, all of which deal damage to our opponent. But what we're actually trying to do is assemble either a Kiln Fiend or a couple of Flame Breathers, a Thermo Alchemist, something to deal extra damage. And then we're using red cantrips to draw cards when we cast spells. So our hope is to have a glut of spells that help us do stuff. They make our creatures a little bit bigger. They give them trample. They give them first strike. So it creates kind of this impossible board state for our opponent to deal with, and we kind of just ping, 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 and we chip away a bunch of damage at them, and then finally we use either a Pillar of Flame, Shock, Hungry Flames, or just a giant trampling, first striking Kiln Fiend to take our opponent out of the game. It's very simple. It's very effective. There are versions of this that add blue. I don't think that's necessary at all anymore, given the level of red cantrips. And this card, Reckless Impulse, which is a huge new get for the red decks, it's a very, very strong, and I think it can help a lot, and it helps make your mana way better. You get to play damaging lands with Sunscorched Desert, cycling lands with Forgotten Cave, and run a very low land count along with your very low curve. So I think this is definitely a deck to have on your mind if you're building any kind of core concept. The other deck to have on your mind, one of the other two, is the Ancestral Mask deck. So this deck is built around an old card that was ported over to Arena called Ancestral Mask. Now, there was already a version of this deck. It was called Hexproof or Pants. You may know it as Bogles from Modern. It is built around this particular card or cards like it. So it's an enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each other enchantment on the battlefield. This deck is green-white. This deck was also green-blue. I've seen Bant versions of it as well. So you build it around a hexproof creature like the Jade Guardian or the Merfolk token produced by Jungleborn Pioneer. And what you will do is you will literally suit up your creature with an Ancestral Mask, Rousing Reed in my deck, one with the Wind, Setessan Training, Talons of Wildwood. You're going to stick a bunch of enchantments on this creature, and every time you do that, Ancestral Mask is going to make the creature bigger and bigger. So then you're just going to attack them with like an 18/18 flying creature and try to kill them very quickly that way. There are several different builds of the deck, as I alluded to. This is the one that I prefer. I think it has the most flexible options, and it also has Omen of the Sea, which I think is wonderful in these decks. The white decks give you Heliod's Pilgrim, so you get to tutor for your enchantments, and it also has the bird that makes them a little cheaper. I think it's good, but I think it just lacks a little bit of flexibility. The version I like is the blue-green deck. That's for another time. Again, if you want to see more about it, let me know in the comments. Happy to do that little write-up. And we also have the third pillar of the format, right? It's kind of rock, paper, scissors in Tier 1. And that is either mono black or Dimir control. I think mono black is a little bit better because I just think that having access to spell lands and cycling lands in this Pauper format is very, very good. So I tend to lean towards more mono colored mana if I can. And obviously, I'm going to blow that all out of the water when we get into making a deck. So the real simple premise of this deck is it's very slow. It's trying to kill every creature you play. It's playing Feed the Swarm. It's playing Grasp of Darkness. It's playing Innocent Blood. Playing Tendrils of Corruption, which kind of ties the room together. And the reason why I think black is very good as well, because this lets you deal X damage and gain X life, where X is the number of swamps you control. So Tendrils often goes off for 5-6 life. You kill their best creature, you gain a ton of life. Put yourself out of reach to be killed. You have Suffocating Fumes, for the tokens or for the rats. Obnixilis is Cruelty for a big creature or graveyard-relevant creature. Total Invasion attacks the hand, as does Reaper of Night. Ill-Gotten Inheritance is kind of your big win condition. This is going to win you the game over time and keep gaining you life. Card advantage with Dusk Legion Zealot and Phyrexian Rager. They also let you get a few hits in, and they work really well with Witch's Cottage. So you can get them back and just essentially you draw them and then cast them and then draw another card. So it's just a body for free. Essentially, you pay a life, you do. But that's not usually a huge cost. And again, we see the fruit to keep card advantage flowing. This deck's very good. It's been very good. It will continue to be very good. What is a core concept? I had an idea earlier where I was like, oh, this would be a cool idea for a deck. So I want to show you where my mind went first and then see if I could apply it to something else. Halfway through deck building, I was like, oh, what about this? What if I took this and ported it over? So the very first thing you're going to need is a core concept. What is your deck trying to do? The red deck's trying to just kill the person with spells and damage. The mono black deck is trying to take over the board and take over and disrupt the hand and go and win through a slow, grindy win. And the hexproof game is obvious. You put down a hexproof creature and put a ton of enchantments on it. Those all have a very concise, obvious thing they're doing, and the cards in the deck progress that game plan. Very important. So the concept that I had is a dubious one, and I will admit that from the onset. But the core concept of the deck was, could I cobble together a deck with a bunch of creatures that uses cards that I want to see used in this format, like Mulch and Grisly Salvage? And can I put together a deck that throws a bunch of creatures into the graveyard and then casts a Rhizome Lurcher for a ton of power and toughness and then fling it at the opponent? That's it. That's the core concept here, is I want a giant Rhizome Lurcher that I can fling. So the whole deck is basically creatures, right? We have the Grove Dancer to help us mill ourselves, also can gain us life, which might be relevant against the red deck. It is a cheap drop. Dusk Legion Zealot to draw us cards. Arboreal Grazer to help us block, because we're going to need it. Jaspera Sentinel blocks and creates mana. Llanowar Elves creates mana, so we can get things going fast. We're going to need to cast a lot of spells in this deck. I want to be casting Mulch on turn 2. I would love to cast Grisly Salvage and a Mulch on turn 3. And then by turn 6, I'm looking to, or 5 if possible, do my Rhizome Lurcher Ardent Elementalist trick. So I also have First Sphere Gargantua as a big win con. It also unearths, so that it can attack and it can come in and draw us cards. It kind of replaces Phyrexian Rager since this is such a graveyard-heavy strategy deck. I want a lot of things that can work out of the graveyard, so I wanted to make sure that was a big part of my game plan. So the one thing I do think the deck still needs is a way to get something back out of the graveyard if by chance we mill all of our Elementalists, because they get back the fling that helps us use the Rhizome Lurcher. So I do think this needs like a Raised Dead effect in it. But right now I'm not sure what it is, so I want to test this deck. So I've taken a core concept and I've applied cards to it. One thing to think about while you're tuning your deck is, first things first is you need to make sure that the deck actually works. How do you do that? Well, you can do this on your own. Arena has a feature that allows you to play against just a bot. So you can go ahead and play, and you go in here into where the table is, and you can go to bot match. If you go to bot match, it'll just let you play a practice game with Sparky. Sparky is, as it explains, the AI computer opponent. So you play against Sparky. When you play against Sparky, do not think that because you just whoop Sparky 7 times, your deck is awesome. That is not the case, I assure you. Don't fall into that trap. What you need to realize is the matches against Sparky are only there because they want what you want to do is test yourself to make sure the deck's mechanics work. Is there any non-bows you accidentally put in? Is there a time you get to a part of in this case, the combo, and can't finish the game off? Is there something that you're just constantly running into? Like, I can't beat this. Sparky's going to play decks that are not very good, even in Pauper terms. All of the good Pauper decks I just showed you the list for, and most of the Pauper decks in this collection can destroy Sparky. It's not close. Your deck will likely destroy Sparky. What you're trying to do is not analyze if you're winning or losing against the bot. You're trying to analyze, is the deck working the way it should? So you want to make sure your deck has game against the big 3 decks. You want to make sure you don't get run over by Burn. You want to make sure you do not get run over by Hexproof. And you want to make sure you don't get run over by Mono Black or Dimir Control. So this archetype here, or at least the shell of a first concept, it's literally the first concept, I think it can do pretty well against the Hexproof deck. The Hexproof deck tends to not start to, like, usually has like a turn 6, turn 7 win to it. It has to get down its Hexproof creature, typically on turn 3, sometimes turn 4. It then has to start enchanting the creature, and that process is a little slow. Reasons why I like Omen of the Sea, by the way, because you can cast that on turn 2. But be that as it may, it lets you accelerate, and I think this deck has the acceleration to where it can fight the Hexproof deck simply by killing it. The Hexproof deck really doesn't gain too much life. Some versions with the white do have the ability to gain life. The only way this deck can beat a life gain deck is to literally complete the Rhizome Lurcher loop multiple times. Definitely why I think this deck needs a Raised Dead in it. Particularly a Raised Dead that I could use out of the graveyard, like maybe, I think it's called Crawl from the Grave. I think from Innistrad, it has 2 modes to where you can use it in the yard. It's got flashback. So I think that'll be my choice just in case I do end up milling it via Mulch or Grizzly Salvage. I think that the deck definitely needs a version of that just to be able to also execute a double Rhizome win. So I think it can, because if we can get Rhizome up to like 18, 19 power and toughness, and we've hit the opponent for a little bit and kept them around 30, 35 life, it's going to be hard for them to beat Fling an 18 and then like untap, do it again. That's 36 damage. It's a lot, plus little incidental damage in there as well. So I think the deck's got game there. I think it's going to struggle for the most part against the black deck, though not overly so. I think the hand disruption really is going to be the most important part of that game plan. Again, it does gain incidental life, but it's not that much. So I think we can overcome it. And I do think we'll have to Rhizome Lurcher a couple times to get them dead. So that's part of the concept, and the reason why I think this does need some recursive part. Finally, red, I think the deck is going to have the most trouble. It's one of the reasons I put in this Jaspira Sentinel Arboreal Grazer package, is because we're going to need to block early G2 Lava Runners, and or if they're playing a more aggressive deck that maybe has Fanatical Firebrand or the like, we want to be able to block and preserve our life total. The Grove Dancer is also a concession to playing against red. This can... and we don't want to necessarily just jam this out turn 2 against red. What we want to do is maybe play it like turn 4 if possible, or turn 3 if Land of War Elf lives. We want to be able to Grove Dancer and then like immediately mulch, right? Or Grizzly Salvage, so we can put things into our graveyard very quickly, especially off the salvage. The Grove Dancer and the salvage, we could pick a creature and bin 4 land, so we can immediately gain 4 life and undo some damage there. So that's the important thing. I really wanted to put out a video that would help you take an idea and kind of show you can take an idea and run it through testing to try to build it. There's no limits in this format right now. Everything's kind of good as long as you're keeping those 3 top decks in mind. That's really the key, is keep in mind what's your deck good against, what's your deck bad against, and how can you help mitigate it with flex slots. So those are things I wanted to help everybody with their deck building. One thing I do want to note is your land base, and I didn't really touch on lands much. There's a lot of lands. You have thriving lands, you have dual colored lands, you have spell lands. There's a lot of lands to choose from. Unless lands are a part of your deck strategy, typically you want to be somewhere in the 20-ish range. If you're not a control deck, the closer to 20 is usually better. Some of my more aggressive decks, like that red deck we were looking at, run closer to like 17 or 18 land, just because drawing dead in this format, especially around turns 3 or 4, is so bad. If that happens, you just get you can lose a game on the spot if you draw a land when you should not, or when you can't afford to. So keep that in mind as you're building as well. But other than that, there's really nothing is off limits. I've tested so many decks and built so many decks. And the ones that you saw on the list, there's a bunch that aren't great, but they almost kind of work, so I've kept them there. There's probably a group of decks that are that big or double that size of stuff I've tried and has completely failed to work. So don't be afraid to test things and try to bring it together, but just be aware of the decks that are good and make sure that you have all of the kinks worked out of your strategy before you start testing outside of the bot. So just really keep in mind, take your time, look through the cards you haven't collected. Common wild cards are easy to get, but it takes time if you have the deck. If you're hampered by your collection, look at the cards in your collection. What can my collection do for me? What do I have? The intro decks have a bunch of really good white flyers. You can easily build an evasive deck that can win games. Don't think that you're hampered by that as well. If you're a new player and you want to learn how to deck build within a limited card pool, let us know in the comments, and we are happy to do that for you. So that will do it for this video, and I want to thank everybody again for watching, and I hope this helps you play some Arena Pauper.